The words came sharp and casual, the kind of arrogance only new authority breeds. "Your kind doesn't belong in here." The remark slid through the noise of laughter and polite applause like a blade. It came from Captain Marcus Thorne, his new silver bars still gleaming beneath the lights of the base auditorium. Around him, the officers' laughter faltered, half amusement, half discomfort, the sound of a crowd unsure whether to join in or stay silent. Against the far wall stood the target of his words, a woman in clean, unadorned fatigues. No rank, no name tapes, no unit patch, just regulation green and the kind of posture that betrayed nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Her gaze stayed steady, fixed somewhere beyond the room, as if she were calculating distance and wind, not standing in the middle of a ceremony. From the stage, General Wallace watched. He had seen many soldiers in his decades of command, heroes, cowards, politicians, but this one made something cold twist deep in his gut. It was the stillness, controlled, centered, the kind of balance that doesn't come from training manuals, but from years of surviving situations that should have killed you. He'd seen that posture once before. Dust, blood, and silence. A place and mission that didn't officially exist. The memory made him shift slightly in his seat. He knew what he was looking at. The young captain did not. Thorne's voice broke the hush again, cutting into the fragile quiet like static. "This is an officer's event," he said, his grin widening as if he was performing for the room. "You must have wandered in by mistake, soldier. The motor pool's that way." Laughter followed, brittle and uncertain. The woman remained motionless, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Her eyes stayed calm, indifferent. To most, it looked like passivity. To Wallace, it was coiled potential. Thorne mistook silence for submission, a rookie's fatal error. He adjusted his jacket, squared his shoulders, and began to walk toward her, the sound of his polished shoes echoing across the polished floor. Each step was deliberate, performative. He was showing the room how power was used. "Let me be clearer," he said, stopping just close enough to invade her space. "This is a promotion ceremony. Officers only. Proper decorum, proper respect. You understand that word, don't you?" No response. He leaned closer. "What unit are you with, soldier? Who's your first sergeant? I'd love a chat with him about how his troops were raised." The crowd shifted. What had started as a joke was now cruelty. Even the brass in the front row had gone still, eyes flicking toward the general on stage, waiting for him to intervene. But Wallace didn't move. He was watching her. Thorne's grin faltered, irritation replacing charm. "I asked you a question," he snapped. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" The woman finally moved, barely. Her gaze shifted just a fraction to meet his eyes. Her expression didn't change, but something in the air did. A pressure, an almost imperceptible tightening of reality around her. He didn't notice. Fueled by his own frustration, Thorne raised a hand. He wasn't going to hit her, not in front of witnesses. He just wanted to touch her shoulder, to remind her, and everyone else, who had authority here. General Wallace inhaled sharply. He knew what was about to happen. Thorne's hand shot forward. What followed happened so fast that most of the room never truly saw it. She moved, not violently, but perfectly. Her left hand rose, fingers relaxed, palm soft, intercepting his wrist before it reached her shoulder. There was no impact, no sound, just control. She pivoted on her heel, shifting her weight a single inch. His momentum carried him forward into empty air. Her other hand brushed lightly against his triceps, a whisper of contact, and suddenly Thorne was no longer standing. He wasn't thrown. He wasn't struck. He was simply gone from his stance, gravity reclaiming him with humiliating precision. He hit the floor on one knee, his breath leaving him in a stunned grunt. The entire motion had taken less than a second. Silence filled the room. Not the awkward kind from before. This was reverent, shocked. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed too loud. Captain Thorne knelt on the floor, gasping, his mind failing to process what had just happened. The woman hadn't moved more than half a step. Her hands were back where they'd started. Her face was still calm. She looked down at him. not with contempt but with the detached focus of a surgeon examining an incision. Then her eyes lifted again, scanning the crowd as if the incident was already over. In the back row, two senior sergeants major exchanged glances. They knew what they'd just seen. It wasn't luck. It was mastery. On stage, General Wallace rose from his chair, slowly, deliberately. He descended the steps with the measured pace of a man about to pass judgment. The crowd parted instinctively as he walked. Thorne staggered to his feet, shame burning across his face. He tried to form words, an apology, an excuse, but Wallace ignored him completely. The general stopped 2 feet from the woman. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Mutual recognition passed between them. Then, in a crisp, flawless motion, General Wallace raised his hand in a salute. The room gasped. A 4-star general saluting a soldier with no visible rank? Impossible. Unheard of, but he held the salute, eyes locked on hers. It was not ceremony. It was respect. It was apology. She gave a small nod, barely an inch of motion. Acceptance. Permission. Wallace lowered his arm. Then he turned to the crowd. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and cold. "Captain Thorne," he said, and the title landed like a hammer. "In your eagerness to wield authority, you've made an error of catastrophic proportion. You chose to humiliate a soldier. That alone would have been shameful. But you didn't just insult any soldier." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "You laid hands on a legend." The murmuring started, spreading like wind across the rows of uniforms. "Major," Wallace said to his aide, "pull up operative designation Wraith. Clearance Omega Niner." The aide froze. "Sir, that's—" "Do it," the young officer obeyed, fingers trembling on his tablet. After a moment, the screen filled with black lines of redacted text. "Read what's unclassified," Wallace ordered. The major swallowed. "Name, redacted. Rank, Command Sergeant Major. Unit, Joint Special Operations Command Task Force, redacted. Awards, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, 3 oak leaf clusters, Bronze Star with Valor, 6 oak leaf clusters, Purple Heart, 4 oak leaf clusters." A hush descended. Wallace nodded. "Continue. Last recorded position," the major read. "Command Sergeant Major, the activity." That name hit the crowd like a detonation. Even among seasoned officers, the unit was myth. A ghost outfit that officially didn't exist, whispered about in classified briefings. Wallace turned slowly to Thorne, who stood frozen, pale and shaking. "You wanted to know who her first sergeant was," Wallace said quietly. "For a decade, colonels and generals deferred to her judgment. Her file is sealed because what she's done can't be measured by medals or lines of text. The soldiers she trained kept nations safe while you were learning how to shine your boots." He turned back to the audience, his voice carrying now, filling the space with iron. "Command Sergeant Major Ala Vance," he said, letting the name echo through the hall, "is one of the finest warriors this uniform has ever produced. She doesn't seek attention. She doesn't demand respect. She earns it every day through quiet competence. And that is something every one of you would do well to remember." The weight of his words pressed into every corner of the room. Officers straightened unconsciously, realizing the gravity of what they had witnessed. Wallace's gaze returned to Thorne. "You will submit your resignation by the end of the day. That's not an order, it's mercy. Take it." 2 senior sergeants major stepped forward. They didn't touch Thorne, but the meaning was clear. His career was finished. The general turned back to Vance, nodded once, and walked away. The ceremony was over. By nightfall, the story had already escaped the auditorium. It spread through the base like wildfire, passed from hangars to barracks to chow halls. The details shifted in each retelling, but the heart of it remained unchanged. An arrogant captain, a silent woman, and a single, perfect motion that humbled an entire room. They called her the ghost of the auditorium. Among the enlisted ranks, the story became legend, a moment when justice had manifested in its purest form. Among officers, it was a warning, the kind of tale whispered at late-night briefings when young lieutenants grew too confident. In one smoke pit, A master sergeant shook his head slowly. "You could see it," he said. Her base was perfect. That wasn't just training. That was thousands of hours, years in the dark doing things most of us don't have clearance to imagine. The younger soldiers nodded, wide-eyed. For them, the story became a reminder that the true professionals rarely announce themselves. Captain Thorne's fall was quiet and complete. No court-martial, no public reprimand. Just a resignation letter and a silence that followed him everywhere. The Army didn't need to destroy him. He had done that himself. Weeks later, before dawn, the sound of rifle fire echoed from the qualification range. Vance was there, standing behind a young private who was struggling to steady her aim. The girl's hands trembled. Her breathing was ragged. The drill sergeant's shouting only made it worse. Vance watched for a moment, then stepped forward. She touched the instructor's arm lightly. He turned, saw her face, and immediately fell silent, stepping aside. Vance knelt beside the private. Her voice was calm, barely above a whisper. "Breathe," she said. "Forget the noise. Focus on the rhythm of your heartbeat. Let the shot surprise you." The young soldier exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the round punched a clean hole through the center of the target. Her eyes widened. Vance just nodded once. "Do it again." No one on that range knew who she really was. To them, she was just another senior NCO offering guidance. But the legend continued to grow, carried by whispers, reinforced by quiet acts of mentorship that rippled outward. Months passed. The Thorne incident, as it was now officially known, became more than gossip. It became a lesson, a required reading in leadership courses, a story with moral weight. The spot where Vance had stood during the ceremony was marked quietly by the NCO Corps as Vance's corner. Soldiers passing by often stopped there for a moment before a briefing or a deployment, a private ritual of humility. The culture of the base began to change. Officers listened more. Sergeants spoke with renewed confidence. Respect stopped being assumed and started being earned. A year later, on his final day before retirement, General Wallace stood again on that same stage. The room was filled with faces, some new, some familiar. He spoke of his career, of lessons learned and mistakes survived. Then his eyes drifted to the back of the room. "If I leave you with one truth," he said quietly, "let it be this. Rank is not respect. Rank gives you authority, but respect is something you build, every day, through competence, humility, and courage. Never assume you're the most dangerous person in the room. You almost never are." He paused, looking at the young officers in the front row. The ones who are truly dangerous, truly capable, they don't talk about it. They don't need to. They're the quiet professionals who make sure you get home. Remember that. Learn from them. He never mentioned names. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew the story. When the ceremony ended, a few soldiers lingered, eyes on the back corner. The sunlight streaming through the high windows fell across the floorboards there, just as it had that day. Command Sergeant Major Ala Vance left the base a few weeks after the incident. No farewell ceremony, no speech, just a transfer order, a flight number, and her quiet disappearance back into the classified shadows from which she had come. But her legacy remained. In the mentorship of a young private who learned to shoot true, in the quiet humility of a base that remembered what respect meant, in a master gunner's office where a single silver captain's bar sat on a desk, a symbol, a story, a warning. When new officers entered his office, brimming with self-importance, the old sergeant would tap the silver bar once and say, "Let me tell you about the day Arrogance tried to touch a ghost." Time turned the event into myth. But those who had been there remembered the reality, the soundless grace of that single movement, the silence that followed the weight of a general's salute. They remembered the lesson, that true strength is quiet, that real power doesn't demand recognition, that the most dangerous person in the room rarely says a word. And somewhere far from the base, in a place where names were numbers and missions were whispers, Command Sergeant Major Ala Vance continued her work, calm, focused, unseen, because legends don't retire. They just fade back into the silence that made them.